With the turn of the millennium and the 6th generation of consoles on the horizon, Universal Interactive knew they need a certain Bandicoot to jump to the next gen. Developer Traveler's Tales was tasked to bring the Marsupio to the PlayStation 2, and not to mention they also had to make the game available for the Xbox and GameCube. The end result was Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, a game I can honestly say is a worthy candidate of being the black sheep of the Crash Bandicoot series. To this day, I still hear many say that it's a good game, while others say it's one of the worst in the series. Where does the game end up in my opinion? Well, let's take a look.
You won't get away with this.
Who's going to stop us?
Our story begins in Cortex's new space station. Seriously, how many fucking space stations does one mad scientist need? And how are they able to launch it into space in such a short time? Anyways, there's a villains meeting where Uka Uka is berating the rest of the villains for...
According to this, your track record for spreading evil is pathetic.
Oh, there's a big surprise. That's an incredible... I think I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from that surprise.
Cortex points out that Crash is to blame for their failures. Uka Uka tells them that they need to make a plan to finally stop that pesky Bandicoot, once and for all. Spoiled by Entropy and Engine, probably because they feel they deserve a promotion. My apologies, I had no idea where that came from. Anyways, back on the main subject. Cortex reveals he managed to create a genetically engineered weapon that possesses unbelievable strength. That turns out to be a Super Bandicoot named Crunch. Only problem is, he needs a power source, which gives Uka Uka an idea. Meanwhile, Crash and Coco are jet skiing when a series of weather changes catches their attention. Aku Aku believes that Uka Uka is responsible and goes to confront his evil brother.
Hello, my feeble brother.
You have gotten my attention, Uka Uka. What kind of diabolical scheme do you and Dr. Cortex have planned this time?
No schemes, just some old familiar faces dropping by for a visit.
To Aku Aku's horror, Uka Uka awakens the elementals. 4 renegade masks who control the elements of earth, water, fire, and air. He goes back to Crash and Coco and tells them about Uka Uka and Cortex's scheme, and instructs them that the only way to beat them is by, collecting crystals.
Of course!
To get these crystals, the heroes decides to gather them using Coco's new portal chamber. I gotta say, this is quite a unique change. Crash stories, for the most part, tend to be simplistic with its narrative, but Wrath of Cortex has a good amount of plot detail. Although it isn't as story-driven as, say, the Jack sequels, but there's more to it than just simply stopping the bad guys from collecting crystals, and that's it. It's honestly one of my favorite stories in the Crash series.
Get ready to face my wrath, Crash Bandicoot!
Wrath of Cortex's gameplay stems the same formula of the previous installments originally started with Cortex Strikes Back. Crash walks around a warp room to go to a level where the main task is collecting a crystal in each level. After collecting all 5 crystals in a warp room, you take on Crunch, who is powered by an elemental mask. After defeating Crunch, you gain a power-up. They're the usual types such as a double jump, tornado spin, and speed shoes. The newest ones are the sneak shoes, which allows Crash to tiptoe over nitro crates to avoid detonation and instant death. Each level also has gems that can be collected by either breaking all the crates in a level or via a death or gem route. Bonus platforms returns as well to help with collecting gems. Time trials also make a return. They can be accessed by going into a level after you've collected the crystal. Basically, you race to the end of the level, and if you beat a certain time, you're awarded a relic. Each relic also unlocks bonus levels that also has gems and relics. There are also Aku Aku crates that gives Crash extra hit points, and collecting 3 masks will let Crash become invincible for a limited amount of time.
Why are these things always in 3s?
I have no idea.
You know, that's just gonna bug me now for the rest of the day.
Okay, so far it seems like they're playing it safe, but that's not to say that the game doesn't have additional features. The game features different types of vehicles that take up the whole level in only 1/3 of the game. The vehicles range from a glider, to a submarine, to a jeep. Some of which, like the Atmosphere, are pretty fun. Crash being in the giant hamster ball going through obstacles in the levels is a welcome change of pace. The biggest addition is that Coco is fully playable. She was playable in Crash Bandicoot Warped, but in every level she's in, she either rides on a plane, a jet ski, or Pura. In Wrath of Cortex, she has her own set of levels complete with her own movesets. She attacks with 2 variations of kicking, a spin kick and a leg sweep, which is better for getting crates below a Nitro or TNT crate. She can also do a jump stomp in substitution of Crash's body slam. Unfortunately, she doesn't gain most of the power-ups Crash gets after beating Crunch, with the exception of the speed shoes and an upgraded flying stomp, which can be unlocked by going through the red gem path in her first level, Banzai Bonsai. She can, however, outrun a tsunami on a scooter. Take note, Asia, Coco has given you the best way to survive a tsunami. Buy a scooter! Wrath of Cortex's controls are, for the most part, similar to that of Warped and Cortex Strikes Back. The button commands are pretty well responsive. However, they may feel a bit odd at first, but once you get used to them, they aren't too bad. In fact, they feel pretty good. However, while some vehicles were fun, there were some poor additions. The mech comes equipped with a Wumpa cannon that has really sluggish aiming. The Jeep in the levels Smokey and the Bandicoot has really slippery controls and is very hard to steer, causing me to do 2 attempts, one to slowly and painfully get the box gem, and the other to get the crystal. I have never gotten both at the same time. The Firefly in the level That Sinking Feeling has a lock-on weapon, but with enemy planes, turrets, and battleships firing back, this level can cause some to struggle a lot. But the worst is undoubtedly the Submarine. Yeah, Wrath of Cortex brought back underwater levels. The swimming controls are decent. Crash moves pretty fast and can do his tornado spin, which can make it a bit fun. But the Submarine kills the underwater levels. Unlike the swimming, it is big and way too slow. So with everything coming in so fast, it is practically difficult to dodge and you'll die as a result. Not even the Beatles can make this fun.
Oh, all the goddamn luck.
In several levels, Crash can climb on grates. However, the pacing takes a massive nosedive. Why?
Everybody moves fucking slow! Everybody moves really fucking slow!
In the level Droid Void, there's a crate on a timer that turns into a steel crate if you don't break it in time. This can also be a huge problem when going for the relics in time trials. The purpose of the time trial is to beat the level within the fastest time, but these grates completely ruin the pacing and can ultimately make getting even a Sapphire relic tedious. Speaking of which, I hate the time trials. They were fun and challenging in Warped and CTR to a certain degree, and others can be anger-inducing, but here, good God, are they tedious. The level's lengths and obstacles more often than not makes these time trials infuriating, especially with the fact that if you die, you go all the way back to the start of the level. Even though I have managed to get platinum in a few levels, but the issues with grates, level lengths, and certain vehicles makes these a frustrating chore to go through. Like the previous installments, you have no control of the camera. Most of the time, it's not a big deal, but it can be with certain sections like the blue gem path in the level Tsunami, where the fixed position can make it hard to see where to jump to. The Crunch Wawa boss is inconsistent with difficulty. Without the power-ups, it can be frustrating because one set of energy waves where you have to jump over it, it can be tough to judge on the timing, and it must be a quick decision because the platform sinks after a certain amount of time. The bonus levels are very underwhelming, with Nighttime being a copy of a previous level, the Gauntlet, but with Coco and it's in the dark. And then there's the one infamous level, Ghost Town, where you race Crunch in a minecart. The shocking thing about this is that you can beat this level without touching the controller. I'm not joking. How did this become a bonus level? Where's the challenge? Where is the fun? Why am I asking you? Okay, in fairness, the level does have the box gem that can make things up. If you own a PS2 copy, then you know about the loading screens. From what I've heard, the original black labeled copies of Wrath of Cortex had loading screens that last a lengthy 45 seconds. Thankfully, this was fixed when the game was re-released via the Greatest Hits lineup, reducing the load times to at least 15 seconds. But if you think that this game or Sonic 2006's loading screens are bad, then do me a favor and play a PS4 game. Or Peter Pan on PlayStation. But the biggest issue I have with Wrath of Cortex is that it offers very little when it comes to new features. Each game in the series should offer new gameplay styles or gimmicks to freshen things up and give fans a reason to play it. The Sonic series is a huge example. Despite the constant bitching from fans, the series has added different content to freshen up the experience. Aside from Coco being fully playable and the amount of vehicles, what else does Wrath of Cortex have that the previous games didn't have? And I know some have complained that Crunch is the only boss and that the other villains have reduced roles. But the fact of the matter is that the main villains are supposed to be Cortex, Crunch, and the Elementals. And Crunch has different forms when powered up by an elemental mask. So of course Crunch is going to be the only boss. So the question is, how did this game came out the way it did? Well, I must address the elephant in the room. The truth of the matter is, Traveler's Tales had only 1 year to make it. Let me explain. Originally called Crash Bandicoot Worlds, the game was aiming to be a free-roaming title with puzzle elements that would also see Crash traveling between different planets. Mark Cerny, who had designed all of the games in the series, agreed to take part, and Sony would be the publisher. However, in late 2000, Universal teamed up with Konami to publish the game on the consoles. The result was not only of Universal falling out with both Sony and Cerny, but the partnership ultimately stripped the Crash series of being a Sony franchise. Forced by Universal to alter the game from the original free-roaming idea to a traditional linear A to B game, Traveler's Tale had to begin the development of the game from scratch, and were only given 12 months to complete the game. Well, that is great information. And with that being the case, it's completely understandable. But on its own merits, Wrath of Cortex still manages to have really decent gameplay, with the controls being pretty good and fun Coco levels, but don't expect a lot of new content and bear the mixed bag amount of vehicles. To be honest, Wrath of Cortex's level design is fairly consistent with the overall tone in the series. The different landscapes and settings are pretty good and remains consistent to the basic ideas of the past games. While some similar themes of the levels are repeated, such as medieval, space, and jungles, but each level for the most part have their own unique identity, unlike the previous games that have little differences. A lot of the levels are based on the natural elements. The Cortex lab levels are unique because they blend in the lab themes with different elements, such as Compactor Reactor has a minecart section in rocky terrain, and Fahrenheit Frenzy is covered with fire. Speaking of Fahrenheit Frenzy, the X-ray sections with Crash's skeleton is a very clever move. Although most of the enemies don't provide much challenge, that plus the enemy attacks and placements could have been better. I won't argue with that. But I feel I must address one thing that I know some will tell me about if I didn't. The character models have definitely shown their age. Considering that Wrath of Cortex came out around the same year as Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy, I wasn't expecting it to look like something Shadow of the Colossus, or Jak 3, or God of War like. But with the hands that Traveler's Tales had to deal with, I can't blame them, and honestly, I've seen worse. Much, much worse. The Xbox version added fur textures that look a little bit odd, but not too distracting, but the GameCube suffered the worst treatment. This version uses more simplistic lighting, but suffers occasional texture errors and suffers from glitches in the ending cutscene. But to all of those who say that the models are ugly, all I have to say is this. What the hell were you expecting? Wrath of Cortex came out in 2001, and the PlayStation 2 was in its infancy. The graphics back then looked primitive compared to games released in 2004 and later. And also, Traveler's Tales only had 1 year to make the game, so of course the game's presentation hasn't aged well. But even with the dated character models, Wrath of Cortex does manage to do a decent job in terms of level design.
Sometimes it's story time. Oh, you know what's great about these beds? They're mechanical bulls. You have the remote control. Oh!
Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex, in my personal opinion, is really good when it comes to the soundtrack. The catchy tunes fit into the scenery of the levels very well. The one additional point is that each level has their own track that plays. In previous games, levels with similar themes like the medieval levels in Crash Bandicoot Warp often shared the same tune, but the composers of Wrath of Cortex manages to give each level their own theme. The bonus themes, on the other hand, share the same type of tune based on what levels they are in, and honestly, they're just as catchy as Warp's bonus tunes. When it comes to the sound, they remain consistent with traditional sound effects for hitting checkpoint crates, an additional life, and the collecting of crystals and gems. However, I have noticed that Wrath of Cortex recycles some sounds on multiple occasions. Then again, recycling sounds is really common in various pieces of media. Either way, they get the job done. In terms of the voice cast, I have to say that the casting surprised me. You still get Clancy Brown to not only voice Dr. Cortex, but Uka Uka as well, and not to mention he's my favorite voice of Uka Uka. And while he does a good job, one can assume that Uka Uka sounds more like an aggressive Mr. Krabs.
Cortex! When are you and that super weapon of yours going to put an end to that interfering Bandicoot? You are beginning to test my patience!
Aku Aku is voiced by the late Mel Winkler, who is easily one of my favorites. He has a great swing of emotions and once again serves as the wise one to inform Crash and Coco about the dangers of the elementals, and none of it feels forced.
Crash, Coco, it is just as I feared. Uka Uka and Dr. Cortex have freed a group of destructive masks known as the Elementals. We must find a way to stop them before they destroy the Earth and all of its inhabitants.
This game also marks the debut of Debbie Derryberry for the voice of Coco. I really like her take on Coco in this game, especially since she sounded similar to Hynden Walsh's voice in Crash Team Racing. That plus she doesn't sound like Jimmy Neutron like in later games up to Mind Over Mutant, with the exception of Nitro Kart.
It's almost finished. A few little adjustments here and there and it'll be ready to go.
The newest character, Crunch, is voiced by veteran voice actor Kevin Michael Richardson, who is easily my favorite voice actor for Crunch. Not to mention, this was Crunch at his coolest. His tough, aggressive tone fits the personality of a very overconfident, super strong Bandicoot.
This is the creature who keeps sabotaging your master plan? Ha! You gotta be kidding. I'll exterminate this field rat in no time.
But the most interesting picks of voice actors go to the Elementals. Rocco is voiced by Thomas F. Wilson, better known as Biff from the Back to the Future movies.
What are you looking at, fuzzhead? I'm Rocco, the Earth Elemental. Uka Uka and Dr. Cortex woke me from my captive slumber, and now I'm free to pulverize whatever gets in my way. Oh, don't even think about collecting those crystals, Runt. Because if you do, I'm gonna bury you alive.
Wawa's voice actor is R. Lee Emery, best known as the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket.
Crash Bandicoot, you've got some nerve setting foot into my domain without an invitation. Don't talk back to me! I'll fix that attitude problem of yours!
Mark Hamill, who is best known as Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars saga, and the Joker in Batman the Animated Series, provides the voice of Pyro.
I realize my brethren have had some trouble with you, my little orange friend, but I'm not quite sure why. Is it getting hot in here? Is it safe to be wearing that fur? It looks flammable!
And lastly, Jess Harnell, best known as Wacko from Animaniacs, and Crash later on, voices Lolo.
The Crash Bandicoot, eh? Oh, I've heard so much about you, and this is the hero I have to blow away? Huh! Seems like a bunch of hot air to me.
Each have their own unique personalities that suits the elements they represent, and they are a blast to listen to. I do have to mention that in the opening cutscene where Aku Aku learns that Uka Uka awakened the elementals, there was a moment where the music drowns over the dialogue for a moment.
You cannot restrain them, Uka Uka. They are far too dangerous. This could spell disaster for us all.
On the contrary, Aku Aku. It spells disaster for you and that precious planet you care so much about. Destroy him!
Overall, Wrath of Cortex does a great job with both the music and voice departments, and does a serviceable job with the sound effects.
More pain, more game. Crash is back in his toughest adventure yet, the Wrath of Cortex. It's gonna be just like the good old days, only better.
Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex is a major mixed bag in my books. The game excels with its plot, pretty good controls, Coco being playable, unique level design, and a solid soundtrack. But at the same time, it has its drawbacks, with some of the vehicles being really poor, frustrating gem paths, and tedious time trials. Its biggest flaw is that it doesn't add enough new content to freshen up the gameplay. But considering what Traveler's Tales had to go through with the game's development, they try to put their best effort with a short time span, and still manages to pull out a really decent game, and I can appreciate that. For any Crash fan, I'd say give this a try, but don't expect too much.
Okay, all systems are ready and operational.
It's time we evened up the odds in our favor.
My rating for Crash Bandicoot The Wrath of Cortex is... a silver medal. Chief Shadow 1750 here. Just want to wish a happy 25th anniversary to the Crash Bandicoot series. I know yins know me as a big Jak and Daxter fan, but as you know, if it wasn't for Crash Bandicoot, I wouldn't be a gamer, let alone a Jak and Daxter fan. As time has passed, I had a lot of fun playing these Crash games and talking about them too. I am so glad that Crash has made a comeback, and I look forward to playing more, and hopefully the series goes on for a long time.
Stop having fun!
Ah, shut up! Anyways, happy anniversary, Crash, and I hope you enjoyed this as I did. I appreciate any feedback, including things that I can improve on. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Oh, and happy anniversary to Sonic, Alice in Wonderland, and Jak and Daxter. Why? Well, just because.
Chaos, blast!